Thank you. It's good to be here today. You know, I get an opportunity to share my message all over Canada, the United States, and I have a dark sense of humor, and sometimes it gets me into trouble. About a year or so ago, I had to speak to the Alberta Engineering Association. Now, this is a group of people who build bridges and tunnels with the infrastructure within inside the province of Alberta. And as I was driving up from Calgary to Red Deer, I thought to myself, what does a guy who's lived under bridges and tunnels for 10 years of his life say to a group of people who build bridges and tunnels? The best thing I could come up with was thanks. About a year and a half ago in Vancouver, I got a, what's going on? I hate it when the AV guy, is that better? Yeah. All right. I hate it when the AV guy comes running at me. It's never a good thing. I got to speak to a group of Crown prosecutors in Vancouver, and I was a little nervous. I said to them, you know, the last time we met, the conversation began with not guilty. See, you guys think that's funny. About half of them Crown prosecutors did not find that funny. Just did not think that was cute. I get invited to go all over the place. About 2 years ago, I got to speak for a large banking interest in New York City. And at the time, I lived in Vancouver. And so there's two ways to travel through the U.S. One is at a YVR, the big airport. But another route, which was closer to my house, I lived in Coquitlam, was to go down to Bellingham and just to go through the Sumas border crossing and fly out of a little airport in Bellingham. And so I got in my car and I went up to the border, and a guy with a history like mine really shouldn't be trying new humor out at the border. What happened was I got up to the border and there was a great big guy in there, a Mexican-American guy, about 360 pounds. He had muscles in his neck, but he had a name tag that said Bert. And you know me, I'm a hankster, the prankster, the wannabe gangster. I started the conversation with, hey, Bert. Which I thought was funny. So we went to the little room. Got to know Bert real well, and he got to know me and the contents of my vehicle. Anyways, I got on the airplane and I almost missed the flight, but I ended up landing in New York City to speak to Bank of America. And I had 1,700 banking leaders from all over the planet. And I have a lot of friends of mine who are thought leaders and speakers, and I said, you know, I've got this dark joke. Should I really open with this? And they said, yeah, Joe, that's pretty funny. You should open with that. So this is the joke I opened with 1,700 banking leaders in Manhattan. I said, you know, in the 1980s, the police wanted to talk to me about a bank robbery. I said, bank robbery? It's a credit union. I actually delivered that to the Credit Union Association of Saskatchewan. They found it about as funny as Bank of America did. It was a long afternoon. Anyways, I believe that having a sense of humor is probably the greatest weapon that we can take to the battle, to take to adversity today. Every single one of us finds ourselves stretched, finds ourselves taxed, finds ourselves having to do more with less. Every single one of us in this room goes through the tough stuff. We face it at home, we face it in our relationships, we face it at the doctor's office, we face it in the marketplace, we face it with the ever-shifting avalanche of technology that's coming at us at a pace that is hard to keep up with. And yet one of the things that I'm blessed with, having been raised in a broadcast family, is that having a sense of humor allows us to shift the context of what it is that we're looking at, and allows us to make new meaning. And when we can shift context and make new meaning about things, that's a powerful thing, because we can ultimately clear a space for something else that's possible. I believe that having a sense of humor is one of the most powerful weapons that we can take to adversity today. Wouldn't you agree? That's really important in my story. And in 2003, I was given the Courage to Come Back award. I had spent a lot of years struggling to fight back from a broken, shattered life. And I found myself down at the Bayshore Hotel. And the Courage to Come Back Awards is an extraordinary fundraiser for an organization called Coast Mental Health. They do extraordinary work in Vancouver, and they service something like 60,000 people in the course of a year, a lot of mental health and addiction stuff. But I found myself as one of 6 people being acknowledged with the Courage to Come Back. And my particular category was overcoming chemical dependency. And so I found myself in a Bayshore Hotel, and they had these pop-up bars all over the place. And I found myself hanging out near the bar because, well, that's just the kind of guy I am. And I think it's my heritage. I'm half Irish and half Scottish, which means I always want to drink, but I never want to pay for it. The bartender says, would you like a drink? And I'm thinking, would I? But tonight, considering that I'm accepting an award for abstinence from chemical dependency, would probably not be the best night for me to start drinking again. So I politely declined. And anyways, he persisted throughout the night. He said, it's on the house. Go ahead, have a beer, have a rye and Coke. And I said, no, I can't have a drink. Finally, I had to come up with a little lie so that he'd leave me alone. I said, I cannot have a drink because I am allergic to alcohol. He says, you're allergic to alcohol? My goodness, what kind of reaction do you have when you drink? And I said, I break out in handcuffs. True story. Laughter, for me, is audible hope. A lot of years in my life, there was nothing to laugh about. My life was a day-to-day, scraped by the fingernails existence to just try and get through another sunset. In 1989, that was a picture of me. I was broken, shattered, full of self-doubt, a fractured sense of self-worth. And I lived in the downtown east side of Vancouver, the poorest postal code in Canada. I was one of those people you'd see pushing a shopping cart around, mumbling to himself, the kind of person you would pretty much avoid any kind of engagement with because I was scary looking. Your theme is infinite possibility, and the one thing that I've come to understand is inside every single one of us is infinite possibility. It's not in some of us, it's in all of us. It's that divine light. Some spiritualists will call that your soul. For me, I acknowledge that oftentimes we look at a situation and we'll say what's probable versus what's not probable. It's a pretty normal thing that we do. We evaluate a situation depending on whether we're going to spend some time or energy on that. But you see, possibility always exists. It never goes away. It's always present. Even at my lowest point on the 100 block of East Hastings, the possibility of transformation was there. You see, if all we ever did is work with the information we have and we didn't clear a space for something new, something creative, something different, well, then we wouldn't have things like a man on the moon, technology, the internet, cell phones, and airplanes that fly us through the sky and bring us to different places in the planet. Possibility is a thing that's infinite and inside each and every one of us. The story I tell is the story of someone who went downhill really quick. And what happened for me is that I didn't start in this place. In fact, there I was on the 100 block of East Hastings, pushing a shopping cart around and collecting cans. But my life didn't start in this place. And I don't remember being in grade 9 saying, when I grow up, I want to have a broken life. I want to be disenfranchised from society. I want to be poor. I want to be, caught in a vicious cycle of substance abuse. I never remember signing up for that. Really, who's got their tweet on? How you doing? If that's CRA, I'm not here. I grew up in this really normal, beautiful, middle-class family. We had a deep, we had a deep rudder in knowing what was right and wrong as kids. I grew up in this little family. I grew up in a little town north of Toronto, about an hour and a half, a little place called Midland, Ontario. You know where Midland, Ontario is? Yeah, one person? I know. That's the bus driver. What's your name, sir?
Scott.
Scott. I love your shirt.
It's the end of the road.
It is. Midland's the end of the road. It's the end of Highway 96. And I grew up in a broadcast family. My grandpa owned a local radio station during the Second World War. He was involved in the radio part of the war in Newfoundland, just monitoring different things, making sure the merchant marines got across with supplies. And so he parlayed that into a career at the CBC, and then he applied for a CRTC license and he opened a radio station in Midland. So he brought the whole family up there. And my mom married. And there was 3 of us kids. I had an older brother and a younger sister and a little dog named Angus. And by all accounts, it was just my life was like a sitcom. When I watched the Leave It to Beaver show, that was kind of like my life up until the age of 8. I can remember, at a really young age, starting to feel like I had this fractured sense of self-worth. I remember around age 5 or 6, I was trying to figure out where I fit into the world, and I wasn't sure. Now, life has a way of life in us. We walk down the road of life minding our own business, and stuff happens. And it's often in those defining moments in our lives that we can look back and see where that bend in the river or that turn happened to be. And for us, that came in August 1975. My father was 35 years old. He was the breadwinner of the family. My mom was a homemaker. That was the role in the 1970s. She stayed at home, raised the kids. And Dad went off, and he was a buyer for Decor Metal. They made seat belts for Chryslers and Ford. They made all the seat belts went in the cars. And I remember the night that the priest from the local parish came and knocked on our door. And I remember it because I remember the sound that my mom made. And it still haunts me to this day. It was a shriek, a horror. My father was only 35. And, I may get my sense of humor from my dad, but I get my strength from my mom. Because all of a sudden our world completely turned inside out, literally in one day. And my mom was now left with the task of raising 3 small children, ages 5, 8, and 11, with no career and no insurance on Dad's life, and no money in the bank to pay the mortgage that was due in 13 days. What ended up happening within the course of a year or so, I will say about my father first. My dad was that kind of guy, and I don't know if you can relate with this, but my dad was my hero. Not everybody has that kind of dad, but my dad was my hero. He was a hockey coach. He was a baseball coach. I remember the summer vacations, a very, very fond memory. My dad was my hero. He was the kind of man, and I've met other men like this, in my life, that you wanted to be your best for. You know what I mean? It's like you didn't want to let him down. I didn't want to let him down not because I was afraid. It wasn't an autocratic kind of leadership. It was a coaching kind of a leadership. And I really wanted to be my best. And I felt in his shadow I could do or be anything. And I felt loved and accepted. What happened within a year is Mom remarried. mostly out of necessity. And the man that she hooked up with, you know what, even if he was a good guy, it would have been a tough set of shoes to fill in my dad, but he wasn't anything like my father at all. In fact, he couldn't have been more opposite to my dad. He was a violent, abusive alcoholic. And so I went from a message of you're loved and you can do and be anything to you're stupid, you're dumb, you'll never amount to anything. And I was 8, and honestly I didn't know how to process that. You know, the thing that I understand today as a father, and also as a man who works a lot with youth, is that if you can get a child to believe a lie about who they are, you can control the way they live. Because at a very young age, that's what happened for me, is that I began to believe lies about who I was and how I fit into the world. At the age of 8, shortly after my 9th birthday, an opportunity presented itself to do drugs for the first time. And I jumped on that opportunity. And if you understood how kind of chaotic life was at home and how chaotic life was between my ears, you'd understand that in some kind of weird, merciful way, the drugs provided security, a bubble that I could be in where I could be emotionally safe. The problem is it was a pattern that would continue for the next 15 years of my life and take me to the most horrible places imaginable. By the time I was 15 years old, I was non-compliant at home. I grew an extra 2 feet, which was really good for me, but not so good for my stepfather. And so there was a lot of tension between him and I, and he paid the bills, so I had to go. At 15 years old, I was on my own. At 16 years old, I began getting in trouble with the legal system. And I found myself in jail for the first time. By the time I was 17, I decided to leave the Midland Barrie area and go out to Vancouver. The year was 1986 and the World's Fair was on. Back in those days, you could jump on a Greyhound bus for $99 and ride right across the country. And that's what I did. I jumped on a Greyhound bus out of Barrie and I went out to Vancouver. And for me, it was jumping out of the pot and straight into the fire. Because what I had when I lived in Barrie is I still had my mom as an oversight. Now, even though I didn't live at home, Mom was that advocate for me, that person who was always there to support me, to buy me a bag of groceries or to pay the phone bill or to cover the rent. She was always there to try and help me and just to take care of me as best she could. But when I went out to Vancouver, I lost that oversight, and I got into trouble really quick, and I didn't let Mom know because I didn't want her to worry. What ended up happening is I remember the day. It was a beautiful sunny day just like today, and I landed in this park. It was just down the street from the Greyhound station that used to be on Robson Street in downtown Vancouver, and there was this little park that overlooked the Expo 86 site. And I remember Expo. It had this great big gigantic hockey stick that was about 6 stories. They had this huge Canadian flag, and they had a roller coaster that's now out at the Pacific National Exhibition Grounds. And I remember standing in that park as the sun come up over the downtown east side, and I thought, this is the city where I'm going to stake my claim. It's all going to be different from here on in. And I saw nothing but possibility. The problem is I had brought a lot of baggage with me, in me. And within about 6 weeks, I was sleeping under that very viaduct that I was celebrating in. There's a little viaduct that runs between the 2 sports stadiums in Vancouver called the Georgia Street Viaduct. And there's a big steam pipe that runs underneath it. And what ended up happening is I got involved in some very serious substance abuse, and after a short period of time, I gave up my room. It was more important for me to pursue this feeling of safety and well-being. And I found myself sleeping under this bridge, and I was one of those kids that would go around the city every morning, and I'd collect cans, and I would go down, and I would trade those cans in, and I would try and stay 6 hours ahead and do anything I could to stave off withdrawal. And that was this vicious cycle that I lived in for over 7 years. I remember many mornings waking up and I wanted something to be different. But I didn't know how to break the cycle. my best thinking just kept me stuck in this perpetual vicious cycle. And, every morning I would wake up, and I would wake up the same way. I'd begin to descend into this really terrible feeling of withdrawal. And the only way that I can describe that, it's like the worst flu you've ever had in your life. It was a pounding headache, and it was achy, and it was, if you've had the flu in the last year or two, that feeling of discomfort where you can't sleep, you get the hot sweats, the cold sweats, you can't eat, and you do just about anything to make it go away. Well, that's what it was like, except times about 50, with the knowledge that $10 will make it go away. And so I didn't have the tools within myself to break this cycle on my own. And I remember life got more and more desperate, and more bridges began to get burned. Yeah, I remember calling my mom and asking for help, and she said, son, I love you, but I got a feeling your life isn't going really well, and I can't continue to support that. You call me when you're ready to make a change, but until then, you're on your own. And one door after another continued to close for me until I had very, very few options. On December the 22nd, 1989, I woke up, and it was the worst day and the best day of my life. It was the worst day of my life because that was the moment where, that was the day that I was going to hit bottom. And I remember I crawled out from underneath this viaduct, and it was raining really, really hard. We don't get the winter in Vancouver like you do here in Regina, but you get that cold, rainy wet. It's that kind of damp cold that just gets right into your bones. And I remember I woke up that morning, and I was really feeling terrible, and I needed $10 in the worst way. And I didn't know where I was going to get it. And I have to tell you that because I was a good kid from a good family, I didn't do the things. I didn't like to steal. I didn't like to have to do things that would hurt people or have any impact on the community. And that's why I collected cans out of dumpsters. It was a passive way that I could continue to do what I needed to do to get my $10 at a time. Anyways, I got my shopping cart, and I went downtown that morning. And the rain was so heavy and so thick. And it was 3 days before the holidays. And I remember because there was window dressing, and there was like Christmas carols and music playing in the background. But there was nothing festive in my life. I knew what I was going to do, and I was basically down to only a couple moves left, and I waited for the pub across the street to open. When the doors opened, I walked in, and I did a very desperate thing. And I remember I walked out of that bar 15 minutes later without my boots. You see, when I went into that bar, the usual suspects, the drug dealers were sitting in the back of the room, and I walked to the back, and I only had one thing left in my life to sell that was worth $10. And that was the boots that I had. Now, if you spend any amount of time hiking or being outdoors, you know how important footwear is. When you live on the streets, footwear is critical. But I was that desperate. And I remember those boots came off, and we struck a little deal. And I remember going back out to the street, completely broken as a human being. Walking up East Hastings with the pouring rain coming down on me. I looked like a drowned cat. And I said to myself, how did I get here? I'm a good kid from a good family. How did I end up in this much trouble on the 100 block of East Hastings? And I didn't have an answer. One of the things that I know today is that discontentment is the catalyst of change. And what I mean by that, it's oftentimes not until we're backed into a corner where we become teachable, where we become willing to do something different. For years of my life, I didn't take accountability for my own actions. I blamed society, I blamed my stepfather, I blamed everybody else except me. And that kept me from actually taking responsibility for my own behavior in my own life. It deflected it. But on that moment, the miracle happened for me, and the miracle was that I became teachable, I became pliable, and I became willing to do just about anything. Now, I was raised, and we went to church on Sunday, but I was never really a big religious guy. But I was stuck, and I decided to try something new. And I reached out that day on that street corner in Vancouver, and I said a little prayer. And it went something like, will you help me? I need a break. Anybody golf here? I need a mulligan. For those of you who don't golf, a mulligan is when you put the ball in the water or the trees and you get to drop it again and it doesn't cost, it doesn't count. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a do-over. I wanted to Control-Alt-Delete my life. Yeah? And I asked, and I said, will you help me? And I made 2 promises. I made 2 promises in that street corner. I said, if you help me, I promise if you crack the door open just this much, I will run through that door and I will never, ever look back. I said, the second promise I'll make is that if I get the opportunity to do that and my life gets transformed, I promise to pay it forward and do something to help the next guy. Within 2 weeks, with the help of the Salvation Army, they connected with my mom. And she flew out to Vancouver. She scooped me up. She took me back to Ontario. I remember when she met me, she grabbed me by the shoulders. And I remember the tears because she didn't know how bad it was until she was face to face with me. And she had seen what those 7 years had done to me. And it wasn't nice. And she said to me, she says, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes." She said, "Good. Well, I'm here for you, and let's go change your life." About 2 weeks before I actually left the streets, I met a sage, a man named Gus. And Gus was this guy waiting on a bus stop who gave me my life's mantra. And at the time, I wouldn't know it. In fact, I wouldn't know it for years later. See, back in those days, I was a liar, a thief, a cheat, and a mooch. And I saddled up beside this guy sitting at a bus stop named Gus because he had a cigarette and I was a mooch. And I wanted one of them cigarettes. And I remember I sat beside him and I put the touch on him. And he gave me a cigarette. He was a really nice guy. And he gave me a couple bucks too. But he gave me something more. The entire time I was sitting there talking to him, Gus said to me, he says, Joe, he says, there's more to you than you can see. He said, but life is, it's kind of dirtied your windows, and so the light doesn't get in, and your light doesn't get out. He says, if you were to ever get yourself clean and sober, you could go on to do extraordinary things because you're a real bright guy. I remember when he was talking to me and he was speaking his truth into my life, I was looking over my shoulder for someone else. Because what stood before him did not align with his words. What stood before him is a man with dirty, matted dreadlocks, scruffy beard, broken yellow teeth, dirty, homeless clothes, and a stink. But he said to me, there's more to you than you can see. I need everybody to stand up. Oh no, he's interactive. All right, I want you to turn and get yourself a partner. You can form groups of 3 if you need to. That's fine. I want you to, on the count of 3, I want you to turn and I want you to look at the person beside you and I want you to say, there's more to you than you can see. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. There sure is. Okay, I want you to turn and face forward, put your arms in the air, and I want you to say on the count of 3, there's more to me than I can see. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3.
There's more to me than I can see.
There sure is. Give yourselves a hand and sit down. Let's take a look at that picture. Oh, you're a good-looking group. Thank you. My parole officer needs proof of employment, so I had I'm just kidding. I've been off parole for weeks. Armed with a new possibility. Armed with just a tiny little bit of hope. A couple people who were taking a stand for me. My mom was the first one. She scooped me up. She took me back to Ontario. I entered into a full detox facility in Kingston. Went through the worst 10 days of my life. And that, shortly after that, I actually went right from that facility to a residential treatment center where I stayed for the next 6 months and began to build the foundation of my recovery. The first decent decision I made in my life was to go back to school. And I entered in at Loyalist College. And I remember when I went back to college, I had a lot of trepidation about school. Because, when I was in high school in Barrie, Ontario, there was 4 high schools. I got kicked out of 3 of them. That's not funny. You guys are mean. I didn't do well in high school. I was a sharp guy, but I was like Bart Simpson. The teaching style didn't really gel with me. I wanted to interact. I wanted to be at the front of the classroom. And so it didn't work for me. And I had some extracurricular activities that were interfering with my education. And so I didn't really do well in school. But here's what happened. I'd also built up a story that I was dumb. Yeah? Probably carried forward from that. That my upbringing. And so when I went back to Loyalist College, I had 2 distinct thoughts in my head. I said, 6 months ago, these guys wouldn't let me use the bathroom here. And then the next idea I had was, boy, is there ever a lot of cans around here? I was destined to be an entrepreneur. I had my exit strategy. Anyways, something really beautiful happened for me at Loyalist College. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, there are 5 key people in my life that helped shape the trajectory of who I am and where I am today. And 2 of those were teachers. And when I think back about, where I am and who I met along the way, I'm reminded of this idea of leadership, about how we can bring out the best in others and how we do. And oftentimes we do it in a quiet way, and we don't even realize that you may be somebody's 5. That every single one of us has 5, 6, or 7 people who really play a big role in our lives. My mom was one, and Brad and Tom, my 2 college profs, were the other 2. And I told them my story when I went into school, not because I wanted to disclose that. I didn't, but I thought the transparency would help me so they would understand my context and they would work with me. Because it was more than just an education I needed. I needed to create a lot of distance between me and the past. And so college for me was a testing ground. It was 4 years where I could go, work really hard, put some recovery underneath me, but also leave with an education to arm me to go out into the marketplace and do something. Take the transferable skills and all the things that I had from back there and see if I could make something of myself. And these teachers began to work with me. And they began to pull that out of me. And they began to have a possibility for me that I didn't have for myself. You see, in the beginning, I couldn't see most of who I would end up becoming. Honestly, I was flying blind. But I would do it day at a time, a week at a time, and a month at a time because they believed it. They could see it, and they helped me move into it. The great coaches and great leaders, they don't teach what the team can do. They don't pull that out of the team. They pull out of the team what they know and what they see the team can do. That's what great Olympians do. That's how Stanley Cups are won. That's how Grey Cups are won. We'll get to that in a minute. Anyways, I put my head down and I began to work. The one thing as a father today I teach my daughter, it's an effort-based world. It is an effort-based world. It doesn't matter how you feel, it only matters what you do. It doesn't matter how you feel, it only matters what you do. Sustainable success is about integrity and action, period. You want to be successful? Get involved in the actions that are going to be necessary for you to find that success. The problem is, as human beings, we bring the drama and the roadblocks. And I know all about the roadblocks. And they're the emotional world in between our ears that push back the foot that's slow. But when we create a big enough reason for us to move forward, for me, in the beginning it was self-preservation, that drives the foot that's slow. And it allows us to push through those roadblocks. It allows us to have the courage to move past those things and take risks and enter into the possibility. You never know how far you can go until you absolutely empty the tank. I believe that the tragedy of life is not that it ends too soon, but that we wait too long to begin because we're afraid. That each one of us in our own way have our lives colored by barriers that are self-imposed, that simply reside between our ears, and they're not true. It's an illusion. But we let that illusion keep us back. Tom and Brad began to work with me, and I started to flower. I started to come out, and I started to do incredibly well. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. And finally, on that faith-filled day at Loyalist College in June of 1996, I walked across the stage, just like this, with a ring. Yeah, I know, I still didn't get a haircut, eh? Change comes real slow for me. There's no losers, just really slow winners. I was going to join that show, Biggest Loser, and I found out it was about weight loss. I remember walking across the stage. It was a beautiful June day. It was about 700-800 people, just like this room, and I remember shaking the dean's hand. I remember my friends back in that section over there hooting and hollering, making all kinds of noise, bringing down property values, making everyone nervous. I remember my classmates, how proud they were, and my professors. But that, all of that stuff, and I ended up graduating with a 3.94 GPA. I wasn't dumb. I never was. I was brilliant. I just had never emptied the tank. Yeah? But these guys, they brought it out of me. They saw that. They held that possibility for me. I remember walking across the stage and shaking the dean's hand, and even the dean was tearing up. Maybe it's because I was standing on his toe, but that's a new joke. I just made that up. I think I'll keep it. That's a new possibility. Look at that. Oh, they paid me for this. Where was I? See, you can't smoke pot, I'm telling you. It'll get you every time. I had to speak at Alberta Engineering Association. I walked off the stage and Mom was sitting right there, the person who was my advocate, who'd never given up on me. That's what made the day. Seeing that look in her eyes and seeing a sense of pride. I'd never seen a lot of pride in my mom's eyes when it came to me. She told me later that night at dinner, she said, she says, I can finally put my head down on the pillow and not have to worry about someone knocking on my door and telling me that you're gone. I never realized for how many years the kind of crap I put my family through. Today I do my best not to repeat that. Now, for me, that day was one of those red letter days. Our lives are defined by a handful of really good days and really bad days. For me, that'll always be one of those really, really great days. I got audited by CRA a couple years ago. Wasn't as much fun. So there I was. I had a college education, and I needed to go and stake my claim in the world. And I remember graduating. I lived in Ontario at the time, and I called my brother. He lived in Vancouver still, and I thought, Vancouver's going through a boom. It was 1996, and I thought, I'm going to go out, and I'm going to give it another try. And I called my brother. I said, hey, can I come and camp on your couch for a couple weeks before I get on my feet? There's lots of great jobs out there. I was looking through the websites and stuff, and he said, yeah, sure, come on out. Now, I'm pretty sure that he didn't check with his wife when he we get along now. But after about 3 weeks sitting on her couch, she came into the living room one day and she says, Minolta hires people with, no job experience and big holes in their resume. Why don't you go talk to Minolta? I said, okay. And so I went in the back of the U-Haul truck that I had, and I still had all my stuff packed in there, so I had to get right to the front of the cab and pull out my best set of dress clothes to go to this interview that I had with a gentleman named Lanny Flores, who would become my first sales manager. Anyways, I crawled in there, and I have to tell you something. Homelessness will do funny things to your sense of fashion. Because this is how I went dressed. okay? I had a pair of brown corduroy pants. The thick cords. Brown patent leather shoes that were water damaged, so the fronts of them kind of stood up like that. I had a herringbone jacket with the, you know, the elbow patches. Well, I had one. I kept this arm tucked in. And I had a dress shirt. It was like a flannel shirt. I don't like yours, Scott. I was down in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. I think that's where they make those shirts. Working for Synovus down there. Anyways, I thought it was a dress shirt because the buttons went all the way to the top, but it was flannel, and it was a hot interview. And I had a black leather wham tie. It wasn't a clip-on, but it was a zipper. And I went in thinking I was styling. 10 years later, the CBC asked Lanny, they said, why did you hire that guy on the spot? And Lanny said, well, it wasn't how he was dressed. He said, but you can't teach hungry. That's what he said. Probably one of the greatest compliments I ever had from a guy I worked my tail off for was, you can't teach hungry. When I went into Minolta, I was determined to make it. And I thought selling photocopiers and fax machines was arriving in professional sales. And I really did. I thought, wow, I've got a job where they'll even pay me if I sell something. It was pure commission. You got a box of business cards and 2 weeks of intense training, which I found out later is the same time it takes to print business cards. And then I got told my most valuable seminar in sales, if you don't sell something, we fire you. Good luck. Here's your postal codes. And I went out onto the streets of downtown Vancouver in one of the most competitive marketplaces. There was 21 competitors. We were passing other reps on the elevators as security was kicking them out of the building. You'd see the Canon or the Xerox guy, and you'd run into the elevator because you knew the security guy was busy with him. And that's just the way it was. And I remember I had a ton of trepidation. I procrastinated. Anybody here in sales? Raise your hand. One or two. How do you guys do this? Oh, right. Sorry, you're a Crown Corp. Forgot. Sorry. I just made that one up, too. Not as much? I procrastinated for 2.5 weeks until I finally had to get active because I had so much fear built up because of the roadblocks that were building for me not doing my job. And I was feeling out of integrity. I was feeling really bad, and I was feeling scared. If you've ever had that cold call engagement on the phone or in person, it just seems like such a big mountain to climb. And I remember I got my cards and I went downtown Vancouver and I stood at the corner of Burrard and Pender. And there's this big pink building there, I think it's owned by CIBC. And I stared up at this building, it was about 60 stories, and I thought nobody in there would ever want to buy a photocopier from me. And so I went to the next building, and it was too gray. And I went to the next building, and it had far too many windows. And I went to the next building, and it was too short. And I went to the next building, and it was too white. And I went all the way down the street, making excuses for why I wouldn't walk into those buildings and apply my trade. Finally, I got to the end. And the geography in downtown Vancouver, I found myself at the corner of Pender and Cambie. And that particular geography, when you're standing there and you're looking east, you're looking straight into the downtown east side. And I thought to myself, I was standing both metaphorically and physically at a crossroads in my life. I said to myself, people down there in Skidrow don't buy photocopiers. This is something I'm pretty sure of. We don't even steal them. They're too heavy. And so I had to make a decision, and I turned around and I went into 626 West Pender, 8-story building, and I remember it was the slowest elevator I'd ever been in my life. It's one of those rickety elevators, and you could hear it grinding as it went up, and it got to the 8th floor, and the bell went off, and it was like, it sounded like it had a sock in the bell. And the doors open, and my butterflies were going, and my knees were banging, and my mouth was dry, but I walked to the end of the hallway, and I flung open the door, and I started my career in sales. And it was some sort of awkward sales pitch. Hi, my name's Joe from Minolta, and away I went. It doesn't matter how you feel, it only matters what you do. I'd love to tell you, gang, that it was smooth. It wasn't. It was ugly and it was awkward. And oftentimes, that's what new possibilities look like. You know, if you're trying something new, it's not supposed to feel. You'd have to be out of your mind if it feels good to do something that takes courage, that takes strength, that takes something that pushes outside of yourself. I called 25 companies that day, and I gathered the cards, and I remember I created a chart, and they didn't have databases, but the CRMs back then, and I started to track leases and when they were up, and I remember out of that 25, I tracked every sales call I ever had at Minolta. And I remember within 3 months, I closed 3 pieces of business from the first 25 cards that I collected. I remember Lanny came in, and he had this big smile on his face. And he gave me my first commission check. And I opened it, and I had this ear-to-ear Grinch smile on my face. And it was the most amount of money I'd ever made, legally. Yeah. And I was hooked. I was hooked at the idea that if you worked hard, you could create a new life for yourself. After about a year or so in Minolta, I hit every target that I could. And they wanted me to go into sales management, and I wasn't ready for that. And so I left, and with their blessing. I remember shaking Lanny's hand on the exit interview. And I remember how proud he was, and continues to be my friend to this day. The next company I went to work for was an audiovisual company. It's a little company out of the US, and I worked with them for about a year. And I was involved in management and business development, and we took the company right across Canada. And I gained a lot of experience from that, made some mistakes, but grew a lot. And then the next opportunity I got was 1998. The tech boom was going crazy in Vancouver. And a friend of mine approached me and he said, how would you like to be the vice president of business development for this company? And I said, well, the title sounds good, but can I see the books? And I said, I don't know if I want half of that. He said, Joe, with your help, we could do extraordinary things. I didn't see it, but I saw that he saw it. I believed that he believed it. And if he was willing to take a role on and gamble on me, I was willing to as well. And so I left the sure thing, the safe thing, and I jumped in on board with Mindware Design Communications. It was a website development company. We did video, and we were at the cutting edge. I mean, it was 1998, and our specialty was redoing bad websites, because there were a lot of bad websites. There still are, somebody said. Yeah. What ended up happening for me is within 4 years, we took that little company, which was a dream in our basement, a possibility, and we turned it into a multi-million-dollar company. In less than 12 years, I went from a kid pushing a shopping cart around the downtown east side of Vancouver to being on the cover of Canadian Business and acknowledged by Maclean's magazine in the Canada issue of Honor Roll, recognizing 10 Canadians who make a difference. Thank you. The reason why Maclean's acknowledged me wasn't just because of the business stuff. It was because of the work that I've continued to do and have a passion for with youth. You see, I'm a lucky guy. I had that mom who was my advocate. There's many young people out there who deserve a second chance, who deserve to be indoors, who deserve to get reschooled and retrained. but don't have the means or the advocate. And anyways, I remember when the McLeans called. You know what's interesting about McLean's too is I'm a lazy reader. I don't know if you can identify with this, but I'm a lazy reader. There's many things I ought to read, but I don't because I'm very busy. And I find that I have a very short attention span. And so I really need all the distractions to go away before I can read. And so I don't read a lot, but the one magazine that I read all the time was McLean's. Because I wanted to understand, I've always loved this country so much. And I wanted to have my finger on the pulse, and McLean's does a good job of that. And so I read that through college, and I remember I was sitting in my office, and I saw the number, and I had call display, and I answered the phone, and it was the chief editor giving me this news. And it was one of those moments when I hung up the phone, and I went, not bad for a kid from East Vancouver. And I remember I called Mom, and I said, Mom, they're going to put my name on the cover of McLean's. Can we have that shot up there again, please, guys? That's not me on the cover. Just so we're clear, that's Haley. I think she plays hockey or something. Yeah, it's Haley Wickenhauser. Anyways, I called Mom and I said, Mom, they're going to put my name on the cover of McLean's. She said, what'd you do this time? I do love this country. And I've had many opportunities to crisscross it and be involved in provincial and national events. And it's an honor because I don't know any other place where I'd want to be from. You know, a few years ago, Vancouver had a bit of a party where we had a hockey game. No, not that hockey game. We had the 2010 Olympics. Do you remember this? Now, I'm not really a big sports guy. Well, that's not true. I like watching the end. You know, I like the Grey Cup. I like the Stanley Cup. I like the playoffs. And Vancouver, because I'd lived there for 17 years, and you know, I knew the city inside and out. When we hosted the Olympics, I said I want to be a part of this. And my uncle Jimmy got tickets to go to the gold medal game, the last one, the gold medal between the U.S. and the Canadian men's. And it was we had to draw straws, and I didn't get to go. My brother did, and so I ended up in the street. That's anyways, it's kind of the way my whole life went. But I remember I got on the SkyTrain and I went downtown Vancouver and I had the iPod on and I was listening to the game. Were you guys tracking the game? Do you remember? I mean, I know it's going back a few years ago, but do you remember that gold medal game? It was magical. And if you were in Vancouver, we had the sunshine like we had today. We had the cherry blossoms out. It was just beautiful. I had all my friends from all over the world there, and they said, "Is this the weather in Vancouver in February?" And I said, you know, it was just so beautiful, right? And the spirit was high, and we were up a goal, and we were down to 5 minutes, and we were down to 4 minutes, and we were down to 3 minutes. And I remember I was standing right in front of the CTV booth when this was going on. And I thought, boy, we just got another couple minutes, and we're going to win the gold. We're going to wrap this thing up on the last day of the Olympics. It's going to be excellent. And then we got into that last minute. Do you remember what happened? You remember that? I'm listening on the iPod. Within 1 minute, boom, they scored, and they tied it up. And I remember my heart absolutely sank. And I'm standing there in that crowd of about 50,000 people at Robson Square. And in the time that we went into the overtime intermission and came back, something absolutely wonderful happened for me, gang. You see, as I stood, can I have the slide up? As I stood there in the thick of that group of people in Robson Square, I began to have a distinction I knew nobody else in that crowd had. You see, I was standing in a place where 25 years ago, I used to sleep outside. And I began to reflect on what Canada means to me. I mean, hockey is this great representation of ours. We're known for our Arctic polar winters and hockey. And as I stood there, I began to reflect on what it means to be Canadian. That I live in a country that's free of war. I live in a country that fosters business development and growth. I live in a country that stands proud for its technology, its engineering, and its natural resources. I live in a country that paid for my detox, that paid for my college education, and continues to subsidize my health care. I live in a country where you can go from Skidrow to CEO. And then Crosby scored in overtime and the place went nuts. And then 4 years later, the girls did it again with insurmountable odds against them, down 3 goals. And in both of those moments, I stood proud with tears of patriotism running down my face, because I knew around this little green planet of ours, everybody knew what me and my family have known for a very, very long time, that we live in one of the best places on planet Earth. We are the true north, strong and free. And I know this because my name is Joe and I am Canadian. It's from a beer commercial. I'm waiting for the cease and desist letter from Molson's. You know, one of the things that I don't think we do well as a nation is to take pride in the things that we do really well. Individually, in our cities and communities, and our province, and across our nation as a whole. And I think that may be because we're conservative, we've got a tall poppy syndrome thing going on, or I don't know, there's a number of different reasons. But I think more than ever, the more we stand and take pride in our talents and our skills, and really, really take pride in the things that we do well. I showed this at a leadership event in Winnipeg last week. We talked about improving leadership styles. You know, I love rooting for the underdog. And I remember last November, my birthday's on the 24th, so oftentimes it falls on the Grey Cup. And I remember sitting at home, and I put the tube on, and I watched the live broadcast from Taylor Field. And I was wearing my green shirt. And, you know, I remember that game between the Hamilton Putty Tats, and I remember the ending, and I remember how, you know, it was significant with the coronation piece, and I think that the more we celebrate the things that we do well, the more we grow, and the more we expand. There's just so much for us to celebrate and take ownership of, and I think the better we do that, the better we lead. I don't think that we are to take our talents individually or departmentally and hide that, but to share it and bring and elevate others to step forward to be their best. For me today, my life is absolutely excellent. And for 20 years, it's been excellent. It's been absolutely fantastic. And I got to tell you that it's not because of the business. It's not because of the financial success. It's because of the people in my life that ground me. It's the biggest thing that they get asked about was, what was life like when I was out there on the streets? And I'll tell you the biggest disconnect was the disconnect from family. The disconnect from people that you love. And the greatest thing that I have in my life today are the people that I love. And I know it's a big room, so I don't know where you're sitting, Marie, but you know, one of the biggest things for me today is being surrounded by people that we love. And isn't that a nice picture? That's a girl I dated in grade 10. I know she's going to absolutely kill me for this, so I hope you like it. But I dated in grade 10, and then we went our own way, and we met again 28 years later. It's a love story for the ages. And I took this picture when we went down to Weyburn working for Synovus a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was so perfect because it's the road in and it's the road forward. Marie grounds me, and she's the flicker in my flame and the spark in my heart, and the reason why I hit the ground running every morning. Mostly because she hogs the bed. We traveled. Marie spent 25 years as an accountant, and she quit her job, and we work together doing conferences and getting to travel all over the place. And I don't want to say that she hogs the bathroom, but let's just say that I've adapted to grooming myself in the reflection of a television. She's where's the notes on you, Marie? I got them in there somewhere. Where are they? Oh, there they are. I know she supports me, but check this out. This is her nickname for me. Are you ready for this? And tell me if you think this is supportive. Her nickname for me is Rickety. I don't know, what do you think of when you think of rickety? I think of a set of stairs I don't want to walk up. I was driving down the road the other day going to a really big conference, and I was nervous. And I said to her, I'm nervous. I mean, this is a big deal. There's a lot of people. I get nervous before I speak. It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. And she said, oh, rickety. She said, you're the best speaker I know. And I was so in my head that actually calmed me down for a minute. And then I said, hey, wait a minute. You don't know any other speakers. And she said, I know. She's always reminding me of how much of a great driver she is. So let me tell you about how great a driver she is. Are you ready? We had a deal in Iowa, and the only way we could get there was drive. So we left Toronto, and we drove to Iowa. I drove through Ontario. I drove through the great state of New York, the state of Ohio, the state of Illinois, the state of Indiana, into Ohio, back from the gig, back through the state of Illinois, back through the state of Indiana, and into Ohio. And I gave her the car to drive after about 1,000 kilometers. 12 kilometers in, she met her new friend, the state trooper, and says to me, can we expense this to the client? Oh, yeah. But my favorite of all, when we first started dating, she says to me, we were planning our summer, because summer's a slow time. She says, I got an idea. She says, how about this summer we go camping? I said, camping? That's like weekend homelessness for rich people. Let me get this straight. You want me to sleep outside voluntarily? And we're still going to make the mortgage payment? She said, yeah. I said, no, I don't think so. Because you're on your own. I'll be at the Fairmont. I got to the place in my life where I accomplished and achieved everything that I wanted to. I had the nice watch, I had the German car, I had the house on the hill. I had friends, awards, lined the walls, and I was empty. I was empty. And then I remember that tap on the shoulder. And I remember promise number 2. I believe that the mark of an exceptional human being is an individual who will give their lives to others, who will make a contribution. I'm 47 years old today, and the word that I live within is legacy. How can I make the world a little bit better because I was here? I think about Tom, and I think about Lanny, and I think about Gus, and I think about my mom, and I think about the lives and their impact on my life. And how can I leave an impact on others? To touch them in a way that when we're done, they're different. And back in 2011, I got invited to speak at Aeroplan Canada in Montreal. And Aeroplan was doing a homeless immersion project. And they asked me to take part. And basically the idea was they wanted somebody to come in and share a story about what it was like to be a young person who lived on the streets. And I did that. I flew into Montreal and I shared my story. And I had about 350 folks from Aeroplan, and after I shared my story, I asked one question. I said, you guys want to make a difference today? And they said, yes. Now, what they didn't know was what was coming next. The next exercise we gave them was to make sandwiches, because one of the crucial issues when you're on the street is food. And so we had these 350 people. They made like 15,000 sandwiches. It was absolutely amazing. We then packaged all those sandwiches. Sorry, not 15,000, 1,500. We then packaged that up, and it went out to a local shelter that reached those kids. The next thing that we did was I actually taught a seminar on how to panhandle. Now, I remember I said to them, I said, now what I'm going to teach you how to do is to panhandle. There was a quiet hush in the room. We had acquired permits from the city of Montreal to go into their subway system. There was 350 people, and they got packaged into groups of 10. And we wanted to teach them leadership stuff. And so I told them, I said, the most important thing to do is to engage people, but to tell them how you're standing for hope and how it's important for you that no child sleep outside tonight. Anyways, they went into the subway system, and they began to engage, and they inspired a whole pile of people with hope. And when they came back 2.5 hours later, we thought, those folks of us who were in the inside circle who coordinated this event thought, you know, if they raise a couple $100 or even $1,000, that would be great. They came back with $13,000 in change. Yeah. When the entire day was done, with corporate matching and monies that we'd received off the internet, they had engaged with over 110,000 commuters in the Montreal subway system. They raised over $80,000 in one day. But then they did something really extraordinary. They got out their sleeping bags, and they slept outside on October 10th to take a stand. When I walked away from that event, I walked away changed as a person, because what happened for me is a door of possibility opened that I couldn't shut. I felt that tap on my shoulder. What ended up happening for me is I went back to British Columbia, and at the time, for 3 years, I worked beside a real brilliant gentleman named Dr. Sean Richardson. He's a psychologist. He's sort of like a coach whisperer for elite sports teams and athletes. He's a former Olympian himself. And I said to Sean, I said, I want to make a difference. I want to do more of this. This work was absolutely inspiring. I want to take this and I want to put it on steroids. I want to take it and I want to go national. I said, how can we take what we learned at Aeroplan and really blow it up? And so we're on an airplane, we're flying into Calgary to work with a client, and he says, you know, Joe, he says, if you want public engagement, if you want to inspire the nation, why don't you do what those before you have done? He says, you know, there's been some great leadership in this country, some great heroes. It's Terry Fox. I mean, it's September. There's Rick Hansen. He says, nobody has ever pushed a shopping cart across Canada. And when he said that, the hair on my neck tingled. He said, Joe, that's your story. It's a symbol of where you were, but it's a symbol of hope. And if you want to take a stand so that kids don't end up where you are, what a great symbol. That'll get people's attention. He was half joking. The plane landed, and we went on with our day. Over the holidays, I began to post on my Facebook page on how I was doing treadmill marathons. And he called me and he said, what are you doing? He wrote his PhD on overtraining. And he said, you're going to hurt yourself. He says, why are you doing so many kilometers on your treadmill? I said, Sean, I'm going to do it. I want to push for change. He said, what a great name for a charity. And so that's what we did. We registered with CRA, a charity called the Push for Change. And we said, what would it take to actually get across this country? And so we began to look at the logistics. We began to take a look at how that would work with my body. At the time, I was 290 pounds. I'm 203.2 today, give or take. He says, Joe, in order to get corporate sponsorship, you're going to need to do something big before you actually do the beginning. And I said, you're right. The first thing that we need to do is we need to get a shopping cart. And I'm not pushing one from Safeway because they always got that wheel. I said to Sean, I said, well, what should we do for a training? Should we go from Chilliwack to Vancouver? Should we go from Whistler to Vancouver? He says, no, how about from Calgary to Vancouver? I said, for training. He said, yeah. He said, there's a few hills in there. He's always coming up with good ideas, that doctor. And I said, that's a great idea, actually. It'll prove to myself and it'll prove to any sponsor that we can actually do it. So we set a route from Calgary to Vancouver in 56 days, starting on Canada Day on July the 12th. Then we went out and we got ourselves a homemade fancy shopping cart. You know what that actually is? You know those fancy baby carriages that you see moms pushing in the park? Chariot. They go on the back of bikes and really high-end, lightweight aluminum. We called Chariot. On their website, it said, safely moving children from one place to another. We said, us too. And they sent us $3,000 worth of equipment. We stripped one down, and we had a local metal fabricator take aluminum barring and put it around to make it look like a shopping cart, and away we went. We got Bobby McGee, an old friend of mine, and we got a free RV donated by Fraserway RV, and we headed west for fame and fortune. And we landed in Calgary on July 1st, 2012, and this is what happened.
We were talking about, well, what the Canadians do to make a difference. We were, thinking about Terry Fox and Rick Hansen. Canadians have a history, a legacy of trekking. And so in that context, I kind of had this idea, like it just popped to my mind of this kind of vision of Joe pushing a shopping cart across the nation. And I spoke the words. I said, well, I don't know, Joe, why don't you push a shopping cart across Canada?
Myself and Robert got in the RV here in Vancouver and drove to Calgary. The idea was we go start in Calgary and work our way back to Vancouver, because Vancouver's my hometown. It's also the neighborhood that I escaped from 23 years ago. So going into July 1st, there was a lot of anxiety. Like, how am I going to be able to walk 24 kilometers every single day, 6 days on, 1 day off? The more memorable moments, probably Rogers Pass, Kicking Horse Pass. I didn't even know if we were going to have a police escort or if I was going to have to walk that shopping cart on the sidewalk. Because let's face it, once you get past Boundary, I mean, this is a city. Hastings is an arterial route, and we chose it deliberately because it's East Hastings. And then we hit those buildings where it echoed. And I don't know whose idea it was, but they just started hollering, "Go, Joe, go. Go, Joe, go."
It'll be worthwhile. Through moments of darkness, they seem to last for miles and miles. Don't lose sight of the brilliance that you are. There is more in you than you can see. You gotta trust your heart. Whoa, whoa. Take off your mask of fear and push for change. Throw off your coat down and embrace the rain. Each of us is unique, yet we're a part of the human race. We don't do this alone, so together we'll push for change. Push for change. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whoa, whoa. Take off your mask of fear and push for change. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Throw off your coat down and embrace the rain. You and I are unique, both a part of the human race. We're not in this alone, so together we'll push for change. So let's push for change. Push for change. Oh, push for change. Let's push for change. We are change.
Over the course of 56 days, I traveled approximately 24 kilometers every single day, 6 days on, 1 day off, through some of the most treacherous highways that North America has to offer. That was the warm-up. The national trek will commence on the 1st of May in St. John's, Newfoundland. It will take 17 months traveling approximately 24 kilometers every single day across 10 provinces, and one Canadian winter, hopefully nicer than the last. I've already picked out my jersey for when I hit this border, because I know that you can't get through this province without wearing green. In the first quarter of 2017, hopefully we'll get a chance to meet again when I come through Regina. I believe in possibility, because I am one, and so are you. I live every day in the context of what's possible for me, and what's possible for others. The push for change is about creating a possibility for other kids who, for whatever reason, have found themselves in a place where I was 25 years ago. And I think to myself, if anybody's going to take a stand for them, I can, because I get it. I know what it's like to get stuck. And I want to take that stand and say, you know what, man? I don't care why you're here. I don't understand all of the reasons, but I'm here to help support you. And I believe that every kid deserves a second chance, and I believe that every kid deserves to sleep inside. So when I'm out there and I'm working and I'm training, one of the biggest things that I connect with is my purpose, my reason for being. And that is to have that hope and to create that legacy for kids like Sydney, who's 17 years old, who's from Regina. Or Cameron, who's 18 years old, who's from Regina. And hopefully the future will be kind to the push for change. And if we make a difference in a handful of these kids' lives, it'll be worth the 5 years that we invested. One of my claims to fame is to fail going 100%. Not fail 100%. That's something different. But we often don't know what we have in the tank until we absolutely push ourselves and raise that bar. The 20 years that I've been working really hard, I've never failed. I've learned things, and I've had setbacks. And what I'm talking about is not failing because my actions have been on point. Integrity, we confuse it with this idea of morality, but integrity is just simply doing what you said you were going to do. And long-term sustainability or change in your personal life or in your work life or in your community is about doing the things that you said you would do. I believe that inside each and every one of us is infinite possibility, and that when we begin to tap into that and we find our purpose, the thing that gets us out of bed, the thing that really makes us either angry or passionate to move forward and create that change. I believe that as we are at a period of time in the history when, in the not-too-distant future, they're going to call this time before. As each one of us begins to snap and wake up to what it is that we can do. And as we grab that torch of our opus work and begin to march forward, we can and we will make a change. I know that because the first time I had that thought, I was sitting on a park bench in downtown East Vancouver, absolutely broken as a human being, 25 years ago. He picked up a can and continued his walk. This man I saw today. With dirty hair and layered old clothes, he reeked of dreams decayed. With broken tooth and crackled smile, he mumbled for some change. I passed him by, this man I saw, picking through garbage today. You know, a wrong turn here and a bad choice there can lead the best to pain. Such is the fate of some, I guess, to live that life insane. The junkie bum, the wino scum, I have no time today. I'm off to live my life divine. I passed this man today. So off I walked beyond the block and waited for the light. Beside me was a hair salon with mirrors shining bright. I looked at the man in the three-piece suit, staring back at me that night, for it was me looking nothing like that man I used to fight. For back those blocks left years behind before I found the key, I realized that man I saw was nothing more than me. Behind me is a broken man, a man you see now free. Life is grand when we understand there's more to us. There's more to us. There's more to us than what we see. On July 26, 1991, I was afforded an opportunity to change my life. Here's the big one. I'm here today because of people like you. If you've ever reached into your pocket and put dollars into those red kettles, if you've ever given of your time, your treasure, or your talent, if you've ever done anything to promote a better community, I'm a byproduct of a community investment gone right. That doesn't just mean a whole lot to me, but it means a whole lot to them. Today, I have an extraordinary life, and I thank you for that. So on behalf of me and my family, I want to thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.